Welcome to this short screencast on Meteor Structure, or how to structure your Meteor apps. This is a sort of complicated topic, but trying to give a brief overview of how to organize your Meteor applications. So first off, what is a Meteor application? Well, it's a combination of client-side JavaScript that runs in your web browser or in a PhoneGet mobile app. You also have the mini MongoDB that resides on the client that is synchronized with the MongoDB on the server. So we've got the client-side stuff that runs in the browser or the app, and then we also have the server-side JavaScript that runs in a Node.js container that allows Meteor apps to access the hard drive or other things. It also serves up the HTML. So the server side has the supporting HTML that is sent to the clients. It has the CSS and the static assets such as the favorite icons and stuff like that. It also has the main MongoDB that is used to synchronize the reactive data across all the clients. So you have to sort of think about how I would structure my application now. That I definitely have this client-side stuff that should run only on the client. I got server-side stuff that only runs on the server, and I got both, that some stuff needs to be running both on the client and the server. So Meteor automatically packages up the files and transmits the code to either the server or the client, depending on some conventions and some things. It could package, if everything is in there, it sends everything to the client and everything to the server, but you don't want to do that because stuff that runs on the server shouldn't run on the client, and stuff that should be on the client should not run on the server, etc. So Meteor is actually incredibly flexible, which is a wonderful feature, but it's also a horrible feature because it is so flexible you can really hurt yourself. So Meteor does support some specially named directories like client. So if you have a Meteor application with a directory client, all the code inside that directory will be only sent to the client. It will not be run on the server. You can also put in your JavaScript the if Meteor is client statement, and anything in the body of that if statement will only be run on the client. So you could do this in a single JavaScript file and not put it in the client directory. Similarly, there's a server directory that if you have code in the server directory, it's only run on the server and is not sent to the client. You can do that again with the if statement, so that you can put code in a single JavaScript file. Some of it is run only on the client and some of it is only run on a server. And that's what we're talking about. The Meteor automatically packages up and transmits the code. So it takes a look at all the JavaScript, decides what JavaScript needs to be sent to the client, what JavaScript needs to be saved on the server, and which needs to go to both, and then rebuilds all that stuff and then sends it to the appropriate place. There's a public directory, which is used for the public web stuff. So like you want to put images and CSSs and stuff, you can put it in there. Often you put the CSS for your client in the client directory because the server doesn't need to know about CSSs. It's only for the client. The private directory is for stuff that you want to keep only on the server, that you want to keep secure, so that, you know, such things, maybe some initialization files, maybe some passwords, something like that. And the test directory is stuff that when it's in production doesn't get sent to anybody. It's just used for development and testing. So Meteor does support these concepts of having a client directory and a server directory, public and private, or you could do it in just the JavaScript with the if statements. So again, it's very flexible and allows a lot of things. So here's an example of an example file structure. So you have a lib directory, and that's common code that goes to both the client and the server. Have a client directory. It has compatibility, which allows, because Meteor wraps everything in its own local var, some JavaScript libraries need to be in the global namespace, and if you want those libraries, you put it in client compatibility, and that tells Meteor to put those JavaScript libraries into the global namespace. You can have a lib directory, which is for common things for the client, but not for the server. You can have HTML. Again, the HTML in the client will be stripped apart, and if there is any head elements in the HTML in the client, that will be all put into the one head, and any body elements will be put into the body. You can have features that have JavaScript and HTML. You have the templates are in the HTML files, and the features are the JavaScript templates. You have server side. Again, you can have lib, so the server lib is the stuff that's common on the server side but not sent to the client. You can do publications where Meteor publishes different collections to this that can be subscribed by the client. So you can put your publications in the server side, and the public directory favorite icon is where you would put, you know, your icon for the web page, so that you have a nice. The setting JSON at the top is for both the Meteor client and server, where you can do some settings, and then the mobile config is for configuration of your Android or iOS versions of the application. It's not used when you use the HTML version. So you can see that this is a general structure where you keep things either on both. In the lib directory, we have client, we have server, and we have the public. That's just an example file structure. It's reasonably good, maybe a little too complicated for simple projects, but is a nice starting point. Now, Meteor has a set of rules for how it loads the files, and so if you have JavaScript files that depend on other JavaScript files, then you have to understand this load ordering rules, but I highly suggest you don't write your code that way. Write your application so that the load order does not matter. The reason I say this is because the Meteor load order rules are complicated, and it's difficult to actually sort of figure out which file is going to be loaded before the other. So the rules are basically HTML template files are always loaded first. So if it ends in HTML, those will be loaded first. Files that begin with main dot are loaded last. And then files inside lib directories are loaded before files in main, but after the HTML templates. And it's any lib, so client lib gets loaded before client other stuff, like an example before. Server lib gets loaded before other servers. But that's rule 3. Rule 4 is files with deeper paths are loaded before files with shorter paths. And finally, files are loaded in alphabetical order based upon the whole path. So it's a very complicated combining things. So if you have something in client lib foo bar, that's a very deep path that will be loaded very early on versus client lib. If you have a directory called common lib, that will be loaded after client lib, because common lib is alphabetically after client lib. So it gets very complicated as to figuring out which files get loaded in what order. So the best way to do this is just write your code so that the order of the JavaScript files does not, the loading of the JavaScript files do not matter. And that could be a very simple data structure. So what are some suggestions for organizing your Meteor application files? A, there are no strict rules. That file order thing, you can, if you figure it out and understand it, you can use it to your advantage, or you just simply keep it simple. Start off with as few files as you can, organize them into interesting structures, often wanting a client folder to hold the client stuff, wanting a server folder to hold the server stuff, and a lib folder to hold the common things that didn't run on both. That's a very good, simple organization. Take a look at other Meteor apps. They're mostly in the GitHub repository. You can take a look at how they structure them. The IntelliJ, there's an IntelliJ Meteor plugin that has a directory structure that's slightly more complicated than just simple client server. but take a look at others and just be flexible. As you start off, start with very simple. When you do the Meteor Create, you just get no directories. You just have 1 or 2 HTML files and you got 1 or 2 JavaScript files. That's a very simple way. Then you have to use the if Meteor is client to organize that. Then you might want to start adding new folders from there. But be flexible. Biggest thing is try to keep it as simple as possible, because it is confusing as to how Meteor does load these files. And if you write your code such that it doesn't depend on, different JavaScript doesn't depend on this thing being run, that is the best way to manage your files. Thank you very much for paying attention to this screencast.